Lights, camera, action. Welcome to my second episode now in isolation here from my apartment in Brooklyn and Park Slope of Conversations with Charlie. My guest today, Jonathan Finegold. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Charlie.
So where are we recording from today? Are you in your home? You're somewhere else, or you're in your
We
home?
are in the wonderful West Village, New York City, over on Charles Street, considered by many to be one of the nicest blocks in Manhattan. And I'm very fortunate enough to live in a very humble apartment on this beautiful block.
Oh, that is very fortunate. One of my
And you can see the full apartment right there.
one of my favorite cross streets. As you know, I think I or maybe not, but I've recently had an office not far away at Goldcrest on Horatio.
Yeah, sure. Walk by it frequently.
Yes. So let's start with. There's so much to go over. I mean, you've been a DJ, an educator, worked in new media, worked as a music supervisor. You've had a career entangled in all different forms of working with music. Maybe wind the clock back to your relationship with music. Were you a musician? How did your life begin in this world?
It's a great question. I play really poorly campfire folk songs on an acoustic guitar bought used. Beyond that, my love for music was based on my parents' vinyl collection, which was mostly Barry White and things from Buddha Records. I recall, I think something called Elephant Memory, I think it was called. And from there, my other biggest music influences, while I was studying for my bar mitzvah, my parents bought me a cassette player. And when I was supposed to be studying my bar mitzvah prayers and things like that, I was actually playing their cassettes, which was Barry White's Greatest Hits, the Beatles' Abbey Road, and the Rolling Stones' Hot Rocks, Volume 1.
Very important.
Yes, and so every time they would kind of poke their head in to see what I was doing, I had my earphones in and I was jamming to Barry White and the Stones and the Beatles, and this was 12 years old, and so that was sort of some of my initial music influences. And my parents would bring home compilation 8-tracks that a friend of theirs actually made, and it featured Hotline by the Silvers. I think that was the first song on there, and since you always start from the beginning on an 8-track, I heard that song several 100,000 times in my youth.
The 8-track, right? I mean, a legacy, a beautiful format, right? Fantastic. And the way that it skipped between tracks. I remember my parents used to have an 8-track player in one of their cars, and we used to have a few cassettes available. I think Elton John, Donna Summer. It was
Right.
it was one of those things that you kind of look forward, and then the tracks would sometimes skip, and it was such a cool format.
Sure.
And the interesting that I think the history behind the 8-track is interesting too, because it got used in different ways over its life, right? And finally, it went away. But
Yes, it wasn't portable like a cassette was.
no, not at all, not at all.
So that was one of the biggest influences. And then I would say junior year high school, senior year high school, my parents had this gigantic Fisher receiver. And I grew up in Fairfield County in Connecticut in a small town called Trumbull. And New York City radio was a reach, but it was possible. And so I took my parents' hangar and I would constantly move it around and sort of create this antenna. And I would obsess over 92 KTU, listening to Paco and all of his amazing disco and soul and dance music. And 4 o'clock or 4:30 at Monday to Friday, WNYU and the New Afternoon Show, and giving me sort of all the most amazing indie rock in this sort of early 80s. And that was the reason why I said, I want to go to NYU. I want to work at this radio station.
Wow. And your parents musical themselves, played instruments, just music lovers. What was it like? I mean, clearly you had their influences and great ones at that. But tell me a little bit about the household and growing up.
They were into going to concerts. They used to go to the Oakdale Theater and the New Haven Coliseum and see artists like Barry White perform, and I would always just get stories from them. And there is a rumor within my family that on my dad's side, I have a Eastern European great-grandfather who played in the Tsar's army and as some sort of fife or drum player. But I don't have full clarity on that one.
Interesting little piece of ancestral history there, for sure.
Yes.
So, in your career, we know each other and have been in a parallel world. I've worked in post and in feature film and television all of my 30 plus years of doing this business. But I was less aware of your early years working as a DJ at the Palladium in what was really somewhat of the golden era of the New York club scene. Clubs like the Tunnel and Limelight and all of the above. Tell me about that time and tell me about how that was launched for you in your life. And was
Sure.
that in fact the first real work opportunity, or were there things that happened right before that or concurrent with that?
Sure. So really, I owe a lot of that to my days at WNYU. And
So WNYU was the start.
Yep. And basically, my parents dropped me off at a dorm called Weinstein, which later on, which Def Jam Records was created, and our glorious mayor de Blasio is also a alumnus of. And my parents dropped me off. They unpacked me, and I literally went right to 566 LaGuardia Place and joined the radio station. And I spent all of my undergrad and grad years, pretty much most of my free time at the radio station. And so that launched internships at record companies. And then that launched me into clubs in New York City. I had a pretty popular hip hop radio show where I was fortunate to meet and interview artists such as Eric B. and Rakim and Boogie Down Productions and De La Soul and Public Enemy and UTFO and LL Cool J. And so all these interviews gave me some cred, and then that ended up getting me DJ gigs in New York City. And I was working at a club called The World 2 nights per week. I was doing Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays, we were promoting hip-hop parties, DJing, and bringing in all sorts of artists, a lot of the groups I mentioned. And then I also remember concerts from Heavy D and the Boys and Public Enemy as well. And there's a great little story. So Fridays, I was working with a DJ partner named Livio G, and Fridays was club night. So we would play mixtures of dance music and hip hop and classics. And a few months into our gig at The World, the owners, which were Steve Lewis, he was the manager actually, and Frank Rocchio and another gentleman, they sat us down and they said, guys, we have good news and bad news. The good news is you get to keep Wednesday nights doing your hip hop DJing and promotion. But the bad news is we're giving Fridays to someone else. And I was like, well, who? And they end up turning over our Friday night to someone who I had no idea who he was until I researched it, but they turned it over to Frankie Knuckles. And as most of us know, he is really the originator of house music in terms of DJs. And we learned to love and respect Frankie and show up on Friday nights and hang out with him indeed and dance to his music. And so it was not bad to be replaced by someone like him. And most of my DJ gigs were at the World, and then I did some other spot gigs. The Michael Todd Room at the Palladium. Also, a notable one was a late night a club called Save the Robots, which was classic. It opened at 4 a.m. and closed, I think, at 10 a.m.
My God, I love it.
And it was over on Avenue A, maybe, and it lasted for many, many years. So I had some occasional gigs there as well. So that's sort of is my whole sort of DJ on the radio, but then transferring it to DJing in the clubs and also promoting parties at the clubs. That was definitely an important thing. And back then, there was no email. There was beepers. So you would have to physically show up and go out every night to promote your event. You couldn't just flash an email out or even text someone or call someone. You can call someone at home, but you'd beep them and then they would call you back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this was concurrent with the rise of other clubs like Tunnel, Limelight, and all of these other classic 80s dance venues that were these large venues that were lined up to the gills. And you were doing that. Were you also doing private events? Did that also lead to you did you end up making that into sort of a DJ private event business, or it was the clubs itself and then that led to other parts in your career, which we'll go into?
Yeah, well, we end up doing some, what were they called? They were called bootleg parties. They were underground parties that were not legal. Or they kind of skirted around the law, and they would take on like a community center, and they would be able to sort of sell booze because the community center had a license. So we did a bunch of those parties. There was a term for that. I'm drawing a blank on what that is. I'm sure the listeners are all like, it's called the illegal party or the bootleg party or the something parties. So we did a bunch, I DJ'd a bunch of those and also promoted those. I recall something called Milky Way. I recall something called Dig. And those were over on like 2nd Avenue and 1st Street. And they were amazing. Back then, when you DJ these parties, anyone would show up from the fashion world, from the LGBT community, from rappers to fashionistas, and you just had this mixed crowd. And that's really all due to the great door people and the great promoters and managers of the clubs that really had this sort of gumbo of people. And it was incredible. It really was. There was no bottle service back then.
No. I understand.
No.
It was actually, in a sense, more democratic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Correct. It was not about the money. Correct. You're right. Yep. Because most people that really knew anybody or that really were valuable were on the guest list anyways.
Exactly.
Yep.
So this then leads to some early work that you did. You described you were involved with, I guess, with Rick Rubin at Def Jam and Def Jam Records, correct?
Yeah, it's so not exactly, sort of. One of my first internships was for Lear Cohen over in Soho at the Def Jam offices. I think they were on Varick Street at that point. And so I would go into his office a couple of days a week and just sit on his couch that was encased. The fabric was Carhartt at that point, not leather, but Carhartt, like jeans or Carhartt jackets, like a duck. And I would just sit there and watch him work and let him do his thing. And so I learned a lot of interesting styles and techniques, and really from Leor I learned a lot about devotion and commitment. and in some ways, like how to get what you want and how to make sure you take care of your people, you know. And then at the same time, while I was in undergrad, Def Jam was first started prior to this in my dorm, and I was not part of it in any way except that I was aware what was happening, and I'd be hanging out at the front desk, and all of a sudden Rick Rubin would show up and open up the first cover artwork and show what the label and what the packaging was going to look like of the maroon cover. Or one day I was at WNYU working on the afternoon show, hanging out with this DJ Weems, and Rick came in with a 1/4-inch tape, and while Weems was DJing, Rick and Weems were editing the first single ever on Def Jam, which was Tila Rock and Jazzy J, It's Yours. And so I was just sitting there watching Weems and Rick Rubin edit, and it was amazing because Weems is on the radio, and then every time he's in between a song, he goes over and he takes the 1/4-inch machine and moves it around in a razor blade and edits Rick's first single. And then being at Weinstein, you just go downstairs in the basement and you would see the Beastie Boys rehearsing. Rick was the party chair for the dorm. And he would bring in these crazy 3-way sound systems, which I didn't fully comprehend. And this was in a dormitory basement. And these were 3-way systems that were insanely powerful and loud. And he would DJ. And the year he graduated, I took over the party committee, and then I was in charge of the parties. And we still kind of took all the things that he did and repeated them, basically. He just knew how to make a lot of good quality noise.
But once again, you had said that you had a period of your life where you were actually, or was this not where was it just something that you had collided with at that period? Had you actually worked with Def Jam or not?
Oh yeah, interning for Lee R. Cohen, who was the co-president or the general manager, ran the label for Rick and Russell at that point. So I was an unpaid intern that just showed up and learned the ropes, but I was learning it from, the man at the top.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then was that what led to your time at Island Records and working as an A&R executive?
Sure. So the first, when I finished grad school at NYU, my first gig was director of A&R at Island Records. And my focus was on the 4th and Broadway label, and worked with hip-hop artists and worked with some club artists. I remember this Italian disco crew called the 49ers, which were pretty big, and I remember some hip-hop stuff, the X-Clan. And while Chris Blackwell was my boss, I didn't work with him that much, but my mentors and people that I worked most closely with and learned a lot from were a pretty impressive bunch of guys. One was Hugo Burnham, the drummer of the Gang of Four. Another was Kevin Patrick, who was the later on, I guess, became the manager of the Cramps, but he was the head of A&R, and him and Hugo were both vice presidents of A&R. And so they were sort of my godfathers there. I would kind of poke my head in and ask a lot of questions and figure things out from them. And then the boss of the label was a guy named Pat Monaco, who later on went to run Def Jam, actually, and be, I think, a general manager there. And he and I are doing business right now as of today.
Wow. And tell me about that.
That was in 1989-90. And
wow.
We're going to be working with him on some music synchronization supervision projects. And he's now working with Anderson .Paak on his roster. So it's things come around. It's a small world out there.
What's the current project that this is?
We're going to be representing his label, and it's a label that he is running for and with Steve Bartles and Doug Morris, and they have all sorts of frontline artists through the Warner Brothers system, and we're going to help him out on all the synchronization and licensing areas, and try to get some of his artists and songs into film and TV and ads and things like that.
Ah, full circle, which is a perfect transition.
Yeah.
To your life as a music supervisor, which, I mean, from at least from a credit standpoint, this sort of begins after 2000, right? I mean, you spent a lot of years sort of in the music only world, correct?
Yeah, I come from the record company side,
Right.
and that's not the case that much in the music. Sorry. Hold on. I lost you for a weird second. Hold on. What's happening?
Are we there? I see you.
Okay, good that you see me, because then that's what's being taped, right? Okay, good. Now we got it.
We're both being taped. We're both on screen simultaneously.
Okay, so you just missed me for a second.
All right.
So, edit. And so I worked for several different labels in order to get from Island to the last 10 years or so of music supervision and music licensing. And I worked at the famous K-Tel label. But wait, there's more. And I worked for a label called Q Records, which was through Atlantic and owned by QVC. And I worked on a bunch of interesting, I was in charge of some projects that Dick Clark was behind, and also some Broadway shows like The Music Man. And then at K-Tel, I was just doing lots and lots of compilations for them. So at K-Tel, I learned this whole part of the record business that few people understand or know about, and it's called special markets. And that's where I learned all about licensing and sync licensing. And then after my days at the Q label, the QVC label, I went on my own, started up my own company, representing music for synchronization. And my first client, which lasted for many, many years until they sold, was Greensleeves Records, the famous dancehall and reggae label featuring everything from Mr. Vegas to John Holt to Shaggy to Ika Mouse to Yellow Man. And so that launched me into the whole supervision world and kind of gave me some initial credibility on the left coast. And then things just progressed from there. And I think it was interesting because I was, again, coming from the music record company side. So a lot of my contacts and connections were music contacts, music connections. I knew the record company people, which to this day is super helpful because I know the managers of bands, and I know bands and artists directly. And that really, is helpful.
Interesting. And so in the music supervision world, people come at it from many angles and get hired from many different sort of vantage points. Yours with a great foundation in with labels and directly with I guess in certain cases directly with artists, right? I mean, so you were very dialed in, and also the idea of understanding all of the legal aspects of fair use and licensing, and how films who are frequently budget challenged to use music can find a way to use all the music that they want to
Yep.
for film, which becomes sort of the anchor of what you part of what you bring to the table when you work on a film. So, in a sense, when you started in early work, what were the challenges, and what were some of the bigger projects where you had real challenges finding the licensing and the ability to get the music to go through and get the creatives and the filmmakers what they wanted?
So, wow. You know, a lot of people want to be music supervisors, just like they all wanted to be A&R people in the prior decade or two. And what people are just finally starting to become hip to is that music supervisors, a lot of the work that they're doing is clearance work. It's really the reality of it, because we're dealing with even more hyper creative people in the sense of directors and scriptwriters are putting songs right in, and directors are having visions of the kind of music they want. So a lot of the things that we're doing is not like, oh, we get to pick cool music for a cool scene, but a lot of it is the hustle of the clearance process, the ability to make budgets work, and sometimes hire composers. And then, yes, it helps to know artists and know managers and have relationships with labels, because when you get shut down on a song and you can't get it, that's when you need to kind of pull out your Rolodex and try to make a call or two and try to get something turned around, or try to get something super cheap. And in terms of stories, there are a couple of great stories that I've got in terms of clearances. I would say I was having trouble with this particular track after the record company in Israel said, no problem, we agree on the deal, we agree on the fee, everything is fine. And then when push came to shove, they came back to me and said, oh, sorry, the artist has become religious. Your song from the 70s, this artist is now, become orthodox and religious, and he feels that the song is not appropriate. And it was a risque TV show and a risque scene. And so I was blown away, because the mix was about to occur and they needed to really get this sorted. And my rep is on the line when I say something is good and then I don't follow through with it. So I kept going back to them. We kept offering more money. That didn't seem to be the issue. And I called my dad and I asked him his advice in regards to contacting my grandfather's rabbi. And what we did is we asked my grandfather's rabbi, who was Orthodox, to write a letter to the artist. And he wrote this most beautiful, heartfelt letter, how if you can help out a man in dire need, that the value of that is so much more important than anything in this world, and that to keep his reputation intact is vital, and to save and help someone in a desperate need is way more valuable than anything. And so he sent this amazing letter, gave it to me on his letterhead, and I got in touch with the artist directly, sent it, and sure enough, it opened up and warmed this artist's heart, and he said, no problem, I'm happy to do this, let's make it happen. And then a few days later, we got the approvals and clearances we needed. And of course, I had to give some money to the rabbi, a donation, let's say, but it was all good. And so you sometimes got to go above and beyond to get the rights to something. And it's just what you do, and you want to make your director happy. And those are the things that your director or your post-production or your producers, remember.
Oh, cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And looking through your filmography, I mean, we've collided on a few things. So I'm working with some guys that are producing a documentary series currently, and that had worked on the project that you did, The Magic of Heineken, which is actually sort of more of a branded content piece that you worked on. So you work on a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what the challenges were on that, just out of curiosity.
Well, that was the kind of project. First of all, that was an early project in my career, and it kind of set me off in many ways because I've sort of become I don't want to say expert because I'm not there yet, but on my way to becoming an expert in the documentary world. And it's not something that typical music supervisors want to do a lot of because it doesn't pay that well and it's a lot of work. But I've sort of developed a niche in it early on, and that might have been one of the first projects that I did. That was a doc, and so it really intrigued me. And then, of course, as we all know, the last few years, docs got super hot, and now everybody wants to be part of the doc world. But I really am fascinated by docs, and I really enjoy sort of understanding what fair use is about, and understanding public domain, and these sort of things that are used often in the documentary world, you know.
And you also did some work on a project that I was on called The Times of Bill Cunningham. Talk a little bit about that and how that worked out.
Yeah, another great doc. Bill Cunningham was an amazing human being for so many reasons. And Mark Bozak, my director, and Jonathan Gray, one of the producers and also counsel, all amazing people to work with. That was a real fun project, and that was a project that Mark gave me definitely some creative freedom on. And there's a scene where it's a montage of all of the gay pride parade photos. And I think initially Mark wanted Donna Summer Hot Stuff, something that was really obvious. And I convinced him to give another song a shot, no pun intended. And it was a song that not only worked, but also the lyrics kind of played in well to everything. And it was a song called Hot Shot by Karen Young. And so it fit the disco vibe really well, female vocal, but the lyrics are about, I need a hot shot. And of course, shot is like photography. And so it had all sorts of double meanings. And I think that was just one of my favorite uses, in that documentary. It's a really, really fun project, you know.
I think they also had a fair amount of licensing that they did, or at least music that they used from Moby. Is that correct?
Yeah. Moby and Mark had met up at one point, and Moby's super flexible on independent projects. And I think we ended up using 8 Moby tracks, and it was at a very, favorable fee to allow us to do it because our budgets were just super limited. And that's part of what I do as a supervisor on docs is it's all about just working and finessing the budgets, coming up with creative ways to bring in amazing music at much cheaper prices. And so, yeah, it was great to work and get some Moby tracks in there.
Do you also get engaged with films where they need help, even in the realm of working and hiring a composer? Because that's not always the job of a music supervisor, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not. You really take the director's lead on these things, and sometimes supers are hired when a film hits post and a composer's already been in the mix. Luckily, and recently I was hired early on in a project, and they were first-time directors and producer, so they let me take the lead, and that was an amazing project. It's scheduled probably for early 2021, and it's called Charming the Hearts of Men. Stars Kelsey Grammer, and it's early 60s movie that's shot down south, mostly in the Georgia area. And there's a lot of juke joint scenes and things like that. And so I was brought in early because there was a couple of on-camera scenes with dancing. And so we wanted to clear a couple songs up front so the actors could dance to the scenes and keep things on beat. And so it was just a great opportunity. And there's some amazing, amazing music in this movie. There's a Curtis Mayfield track, and then there's a song called Wang Dang Doodle, and there's an amazing composer that that I brought in from the West Coast, and I can't get too much into it, but
no problem.
Super excited to have him to be part of the project, you know.
And you had mentioned another project that I had briefly collided with called Lenox Hill. I don't know much about what you did on that. Tell me more about that.
Sure. That was Ruthie and Addie, producer, director, team, and they pretty much knew what they wanted. A lot of times, all the time, we just did the clearances for them. And, you know, we watched, of course, we have to watch everything to determine if there's songs and music that need to be cleared. We help bring in and coordinate fair use attorneys. But that was mostly a lot of clearance work and just watching, listening to things. And we did some creative work with them, but in the end, it was really their tracks that they wanted. And the highlights in there, I would say Jill Scott and Radiohead were two highlights. And that debuts June 10th. And it's a Netflix exclusive, and it's about the hospital systems in New York City at Lenox Hill, and it's a must. It will have you. It's hair raising, and it gives you goosebumps. And I shedded a few tears, and it's really moving, and it's very timely with what's happening in terms of healthcare and in terms of COVID-19, and so I'm kind of giving a plug for it, right? I don't usually
with that. I love it.
Lenox Hill. That's one N in Lenox.
That's right.
But it's actually you can go onto Netflix's website now and you can save it. I've noticed they just put it up the other day. It's an 8-part docuseries.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
And another gentleman that I ran into just in my own path, post-supervising and working in docs, was a gentleman by the name of Michael Dweck, who made a film called The Truffle Hunter. Tell me about The Truffle Hunter. I was fascinated by the amount of time it took for him to make this film, and what a journey it was. He's by origin really kind of a renowned still photographer.
Yeah. And
he went ahead and made this documentary, and at last year's Sundance was purchased by Sony Classics. And what an amazing success. Tell me about the journey of working on that project and what you did.
You know, I'm just lucky. I'm lucky that Michael worked on a project the prior year that I helped him clear one song for pro bono, just to do the right thing. And then I get a call in December, this past December, saying, "Hey, my doc is in Sundance. I need you in 4 weeks to get this to music supervise this project." And we actually gave him a bunch of songs that we end up using. So we replaced some of the initial songs that he wanted that really fit well. Fair use was an important part of this project as well. And we really went crazy, and we had to get this thing done immediately because we were debuting, I think it was the 21st of January. And you had to deal with Christmas and the record companies closing during Christmas. And also we were clearing music that involved Italian songwriters and Italian artists. And therefore they were also on holiday. So it was a large project, and it was, a very tight budget, but we made it work. And I was ecstatic that Sony Classics, bought it. And I think it's going to come out towards the end of this year, and it will open up in theaters, and don't miss it. It's an amazing project. And
I can't wait.
And Michael and his partner there on that doc, they just did an incredible job. The music is cool. It's a great story. And you'll also shed a tear there as well.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolutely remarkable project, and what a journey it was to make it. Um, you have worked as a professor over the years, a big theme in your life, Marymount College, as well as the Clive Davis School at NYU. To talk a little bit about being an educator and a professor.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, I'm getting a lot of messages, and I'm trying to tell people to stop messaging me for a moment. So, when I was in grad school at NYU, I got asked by the department head, "Hey, prepare a syllabus for this undergraduate class. We might need you." And all of a sudden, as a second-year grad student, I'm thrown into teaching undergrads an introduction to the music industry. And it ended up lasting for a few years. And then I decided that I really love teaching and that I wanted to eventually teach full-time. But I realized that I needed more war stories. I needed to talk about, late nights and concerts and crazy things that occurred in rock and roll and in hip hop, and that I needed to kind of go out there and start doing stuff. So I went back into the work world and worked for all these different labels. And then around 10 years ago, I started teaching again with the Clive Davis School of Recorded Music in the NYU Tisch School. They had started up this program, and I got asked to do an A&R class there. And so for maybe three, 4 semesters, I taught the A&R class, and then at the same time I was on adjunct staff, took part of the formulation of the program, and helped on the admissions committee, and did regular meetings to help kind of direct ways to where the program was heading. It was a great experience, and then from there I taught over at the other NYU music business program called Music Business Technology in Steinhardt School, and then I also taught over at Marymount Manhattan College, which is where I currently reside. And I was just thinking, a good little story from the Clive Davis School. I brought in a couple of guests at one point, and so one class I brought in Q-Tip from Tribe Called Quest, and so all of a sudden my students are sitting there like, oh my God! And he hung out for an hour or two, talked about him being an artist and A&R and all sorts of things, music related and Tribe Called Quest related, and that was an amazing experience. And then another time I brought George Clinton in to class, but then they end up moving the class physically to where the whole department could sit in. But that was really an interesting time. And I'm sure there was some other cool speakers, and definitely a lot of industry executives I brought in over the years. It just reminded me about a few of them. Yeah. And then right now, I'm teaching a music supervision and music licensing class over at Marymount. And it's the first time I've taught that class exactly. And so it's an experiment. And that school is sort of thinking of creating a music industry minor that industry minor that I will be formulating for them. So I'm hoping that might start. I'm not sure if it's going to be this fall or next spring, but soon. And I think that would be pretty cool.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
And in terms of the current status of the way things are working, my son's a university student up in upstate New York, but he's home taking classes online. Are you giving classes online this semester?
Oh yeah, you can join in Tuesday nights, 7:20 to 10:01.
I'll audit that class.
Yeah, we're on Zoom, and it's interesting, and I like it. I mean, of course, you want to be in person, but I like it because I'm able to show the students my computer. And so I can jump to a website and go on to ASCAP.com or BMI.com, log onto my account, and show them what a Q sheet is, show them what royalties look like. So I like that. I can jump on and show them a brief from an ad agency that came in. And so they could, I mean, I could upload that to the Blackboard, and then they can share it that way. But some things I don't want them to have. I just want them to look at it. And so we've been able to kind of go through things that I can share screens with. So I really like that aspect of it. But I like being in front of people. You know, I've done a lot of master classes and different lectures, and so it's exciting, and it's definitely gives me a little bit of a rush. And I guess it's equivalent to like a rock and roller, you know, performing live. You know, like that's what I can bring to the table because I can't bring my shitty guitar, acoustic guitar, singing, blowing in the wind.
So you had mentioned to me when we were talking in a sidebar a little bit about some of the new media stuff that you've been involved in. I think there was something for Spotify. I can't remember Pineapple or what it was a podcast. Tell me a little bit about that and about this sort of new media work that you're doing that falls out perhaps of
Sure.
the music supervision world.
Sure. So, you know, new media, there are areas where if the music is going to end up staying on the internet or, you know, on the World Wide Web, then rights need to be secured. It's not like a one-time stream coming from Spotify. So the Oculus has a company called Supersphere, and Supersphere is doing concerts where you would put on the Oculus and watch the concerts, and you'll be in the venue. And so both you and I can go in and watch a show as an avatar, look at each other as avatars, but then be watching the same Fish show at Madison Square Garden on Halloween night or whatever it might be. And so that allows the population to increase. And it's interesting because of social distancing, it might become more relevant than ever. You know, they might not be able to put 19,800 people at Madison Square Garden for a Fish show. They might have to cut it back. And so maybe
tell me a little bit about how that works. You have Oculus, which is a VR company.
Yep.
The shows that you're describing, correct me if I'm wrong, these are shows that have already happened, right? They're not live shows.
Correct.
Right.
But, or they might be like, because of social distancing, they're discussing doing some concerts at people's houses.
Aha. So there is a future opportunity for live performance and VR viewing. Now, tell me the metrics on this and the economics on this for concert promoters and people that are trying to get people engaged. Does this also involve ultimately ticket sales and subscriptions or something? I mean, there's got to be a financial aspect to that. How does that all work?
So Supersphere is a company, you know, where you would log in and then through them you would be able to watch the concert with the Oculus being the hardware. And because it's just not a one-time stream and because it's going to be accessible on demand, you need to get music rights for it. So I'm the music supervisor for that. But again, I'm just doing the clearances and getting them the rights and negotiating those rights for them. So then it can sit and live somewhere and stay somewhere for a certain period of time.
So these are sort of virtual events, right? That live on a site.
Yep.
And you can go back and in the at least in the Oculus VR world, you can go back and say, hey, I want to go see a concert from whenever it was, and you can log in, put on your goggles, and watch a show, and even invite friends to go with you.
Right. That's one of the other things. You could all schedule yourself to go. And then The other thing I'm working on through a company called Pineapple Media, I'm doing a podcast called Seeds of Change, and so I think it's 10 episodes, and so it's a story. I can't get too much into detail, but it involves the CIA and the fall of the wall in Berlin, and it has music in it, and it has not just songs during the project, but it has like an intro and an outro, sort of title songs that are being played. And they're not a theme necessarily, but it's a song from like Rat Tat Tat, for instance. And so we have to get rights to that because it's going to sit on websites, and it's going to sit where you can demand it at any point in time that you want. It will also debut on Spotify as well. And so it's called Seeds of Change. It's dropping, I want to say May 10th. And especially if you're a fan of heavy metal and rock and roll and the band Scorpions, you will thoroughly enjoy this sort of this project. You know, it's a fun one.
Interesting.
Yep.
So these are two new media projects that you're doing currently while teaching.
Yep.
After Bill Cunningham, you did projects like Leaving Now and Blessed Child and Awakening and Antarctica. Tell me a little bit about some of the other projects that you've rattled through in your filmography.
Sure, my pleasure. I'm Leaving Now was called Yo Soy. God, they're going to kill me if I don't remember what it was called. So I'm Leaving Now, and I'll remember it, I'm sure, in a second. Is about a Brooklyn, a Mexican who's living in Brooklyn, who is here illegally, and sends money home to his family, but he's never seen his youngest son, and so he's trying to decide. Oh, it's called Yamavoy. He's trying to decide as time runs out in his life, and as he's getting older, to go back home to see the son that he's never seen, who's now a teenager. And so the question is, should I stay or should I go? Because if he leaves to go, he might not get back into America. And in Brooklyn, he's basically cleaning up mikvahs and collecting cans and bottles, and lives in a very small little basement apartment, and sends money home to his family, which I think is three kids and a wife. And the wife really doesn't want him to come home. The wife just wants the money. And so the movie ends up using the Clash, Should I Stay or Should I Go? And then we ended up having it recorded by Xenia Rubios in Spanish. And that was also a tough clearance, that song. And the Clash don't want and don't care about the money as much as you would expect from the Clash, as much as they do about the project itself. And so we had to jump through a lot of hoops, and we had to get a lot of approvals in terms of Mick Jones and then and Joe Strummer's estate. And we had to even send footage. And in the end, it cost nothing. It was like, $1,000 or something. So it was super cheap, but it was nothing to do with the money. It was really about the project itself. And it's a really, meaningful documentary about immigration. And I highly recommended it. Came out in January, and I know a bunch of people that have seen it in Mexico as well. And it's in subtitles, English subtitles. But it's called I'm Leaving Now, or Yamavoy.
Nice. And then you went on to do And We Go Green, Blessed Child, and a few others like this. What any highlight stories for those?
Blessed Child's about the Moonies. Just got distribution. Just has you know, that's a great example of like, I'm being called a music super, and the reality is I just cleared the end title song for them, and then that was it. And yes, I chose the song, or it was a song that that I gave them that they liked, and it was from an amazing sort of reggae artist based in Hawaii named Mishka, who used to be signed to Jimmy Buffett's label, and also was first discovered actually by the president of Creation Records and was signed to Creation in the UK. So that's just an example of giving a great track. They liked it. They want to use it. Part of my fee is that I get the title music supervisor. So that's that will come out, I think, later this year. I was just in touch, just reminded me I have to call her. Let's see the other projects. Trying to think what else maybe that is new that I haven't mentioned.
There was Awakening in Antarctica.
Yeah, Antarctica's trying to get distribution. It's a fun little movie. That's actually got a great story as well, so I will reference that. So I start working on Antarctica. Last year. And Billie Eilish was on the rise, and her song might have just hit #1. And the owner of the film company producing it, not the director, the owner said, "Let's get Billie Eilish, bad guy. Let's get it. It's such a great song. It's perfect for this club scene that we've got, which is a house party. It'd be great." So I said, fine, your wish is my command. So I go in and I actually cleared the song for a surprisingly reasonable fee and affordable by standards by our budget. And we were watching playback before the mix, and I said, I got to be honest. I said, based on the voiceover and what's happening in the scene, you almost can't really hear the song. And I said, let's come up with some alternates and just have some alternate ideas. And when we mix it, if there's a way to boost it up and it sounds good, then we'll use it. But if we realize that it's lost, then we'll use the backup track. And so the owner of the company, who is amazing and I adore her, Kim Jackson, she said, okay, it sounds like a great plan. And then her question was, well, can we say the movie features Billie Eilish or a music from Billie Eilish? And I said, no, you cannot do that. I said, if it was a new song that you paid for, you could say features a new song by Billie Eilish. I said, but you're just licensing in the song. You don't have those type of rights. You can get those rights, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And so in the mix, we end up going with the other track because you just couldn't hear the song. And I just said, it's not worth spending that amount of money. And we got something for like $1,000. And the person that got the $1,000 calls me every month and says, oh my God, thank you so much. I love being in that movie. And we made their year. Billie Eilish, it would have been just, she probably would have not even processed it. So it was a win-win. And so I thought it was kind of an interesting story, Yeah,
that is interesting. So a freeze frame on that thought for a second, though, that I found kind of interesting. The idea is that you can get the licensed rights to a piece, but if you want to literally market the idea, not only that the cut's in there, but to actually have it in what you're saying about the film, featuring a song by Billie Eilish, that adds to the cost. That would be on any project, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you were doing a soundtrack for the album, you could put, features songs from, but you would ask the label and get approval. And they might say, yes, you can put us, but you have to put us the same size as you put all the other artists. And you can't just put us. You can't take advantage of the situation unfairly or without paying for it properly, you know.
To create marquee value, you know, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, exactly.
Interesting. Any other fabulous new media stuff you're doing or feature films that we have not landed on that you have great stories about that you'd like to talk about? I'm always interested in
Sure.
The lavender scene. You did work for Jonathan Gray on Pottersville. You worked on Tribal Justice, Marjorie Prime, all kinds of films going back.
Yeah, I mean, Marjorie Prime was a great project that got into Sundance and that won a Science Award or Best Sci-Fi or Science-Driven Film at Sundance maybe 3-4 years ago. So that was exciting. But my director, you know, he knew exactly what he wanted. I just got him the rights. And that we end up getting Bob Dylan for that one. And that's an interesting one, too. Bob Dylan's not that challenging to clear as long as he likes the project and wants to do it. And you go directly to his manager, who's like lives in the Village or lives somewhere in New York City and puts his, yeah. So that was awesome to have. You know, for marquee artists like that, it's really about they want to have their name associated with the right type of projects, you know. So.
Did you see the documentary Echo in the Canyon? It was about the music scene in Laurel Canyon.
Oh, yeah. I didn't see it, but they're the ones that played on Pet Sounds.
Not sure about that, but they actually, I mean, in the case of that, Jake Dylan actually created like a little band that went with it. And when they premiered it, they all played the songs. And it was all these folk artists that had moved out to Los Angeles. I would imagine on these types of projects where you have so many of these folks, it must be quite a process to do that type of clearance where it's really a music-driven.
Yeah. When it's a music-driven project, it takes a lot of work, and I am working on something right now that I can't get into too much, but it's a biopic documentary about a heritage artist, and it will take a lot of work. But what you try to do is you try to line it all up ahead of time, and before you even enter the project, so then everyone's on board. You know.
Right. I mean, that's the whole prep side, the part that the gotcha that people get caught with when they go along and do everything that they want to do and then bring in the music supervisor too late.
Yep. Exactly. What about you? How are you doing today? What are you working on, Charlie?
I'm working on a music documentary series myself, but I'm under a bit of a what is it? They call it a
NDA.
It's a non-disclosure. Exactly. It's a 6-episode series on a hip hop artist, and it's mostly shot, not fully shot, mostly shot in Los Angeles. We're posting here in New York, and it's
cool.
Exciting thing. I am working on developing another project that we may need to call you on. It's a documentary on the life of the great Hawaiian entertainer Don Ho.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
I'd be honored to work on something like that. Pull out my ukulele, strum.
Tiny Bubbles.
Oh yeah, no, he's a legend. I mean, he's really a legend.
Yeah, and a character that was born in 1930, 29 years before Hawaii becomes a state. So it's an interesting story of sort of a native Hawaiian son that becomes sort of the symbol of the island. So it's in many ways more about the iconic individual than it is really about the music itself.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful, Jonathan. Thank you so much for coming on to do this episode with us. Very exciting. And thank you. And I really appreciate this. And you be well and stay safe. And we'll we'll be talking soon. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you for the time, and thank you for thinking of interviewing me. I'm just a humble dude who loves music and yeah, just cherishes and enjoys every day, one day at a time. Stay safe, everyone.
Yes, stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, brother.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.